You want it? We have it. The hottest mortgage and real estate strategy broadcast in the nation. A Smarter Way Home with your host, Danielle Boote and Victor Bals. 50 years combined experience, ranked in the top 1% in the nation for home loan originations 2020. Promise to expand your knowledge, utilizing creative mortgage financing and home buying strategies. Build a bridge for a better quality of life. Get your brain cells firing for a smarter way home. And welcome to another episode of A Smarter Way Home. I am your host, Victor Bals. We are always talking of very cool modern mortgage strategies and home buying strategies for both our real estate professionals and our consumers. And today we got a great show. We got a local appraiser here. Danielle's going to introduce him. But first, let me introduce my co-host, my friend, my boss, actually, the wonderful loan officer extraordinaire, Mrs. Danielle Boote.
Good morning, Victor. I don't think I'm anybody's boss, right?
Well,
you know,
well, I have all.
There's a difference between managing and being a boss, and I just kind of keep all of our ducks in a row.
Yeah, but my problem is I have 3 assistants. They're all women, and then you're technically the boss, and then I got my wife, who is my boss's boss.
You've never been better in your life, have you? Yeah, actually, think of it that way.
I'm hired from the neck down. I just drive and pay. I'm told what to do. So anyway, we got a good show today, Danielle. And who do we have here? We have a very special guest.
We have a very special guest. So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Mike Wilbanks and his beautiful wife, Karen. Mike is a certified residential appraiser. He has been a real estate appraiser, I believe, for 40 years in the Detroit market. And we are very fortunate that he is in our Livingston County market because he is our definitely our local expert. I have personally had the pleasure of knowing Mike, I hate to say it, for over 30 years. He was the appraisal manager at the mortgage company that we worked at in the late 80s. So Mike has always been a great resource.
When the jumbo loan was $47,000.
Yeah. Oh, dang, probably.
Well, welcome aboard, Mike, and your wife, Karen. Hi. Good morning.
Thank you for having us.
Good. So, hey, as we're going to talk about appraisals, I just got to get one question off my back right out of the gate before we dig in here, as I get calls from customers and says, that appraiser is crazy. How could it be $10,000 low or $10,000 high? Because Zillow says it's worth this. Redfin says it's worth this. Real estate or Realtor.com says it's worth this. What's going on in the minds of the consumers? My answer to them is, well, that's because it's free. You know, so what is this whole mechanism behind these Zillows and all that with values, Mike? Do you get those questions a lot?
I really don't a lot. From realtors, we do.
Yeah.
And because they have to deal with when they go to list a house. They're running an algorithm. And if you ever look when Zillow discloses what they're using, it can be an active listing, which really shouldn't be an influence on value because it hasn't sold. You can list it for whatever you want. That can skew it. And frequently, I just did one for a realtor and we were discussing it, and they had the Zestimate, but they included waterfront properties and we were non-waterfront. So it really skewed it. But the consumer, once they hear that number, they think, oh, that's gospel, because it's usually something they want. And if it's a number they don't like, then of course it's crazy.
Right.
So I guess what's important for consumers to understand is the difference between an appraisal and, for instance, a home inspection. We get that question all the time. Well, who orders the appraisal and versus the home inspection? And consumers don't understand the difference. So a home inspection is an inspection that the buyer pays for to check the condition of the home. Okay, which is not the same thing as an appraisal. You know, a home inspection can be very in-depth, but they're going to look at the mechanicals, they're going to look at, safety factors, things of that nature. Why don't you tell us a little bit, Mike, what the difference is between an appraisal and kind of the home inspection so that the consumer, a potential buyer, understands, and then even it would help a realtor explain it a little bit better.
I think it's great in the last 10 years, the home inspection business has really blossomed. And I think it's a great product for the consumer. I use it when I buy as well. They're trained to look at the furnace, the mechanicals, and so forth. In contrast, the appraiser is out there to observe, one, are those kitchen cabinets upgraded? How many baths? What's the floor plan? Is this a colonial with all 4 bedrooms up versus a master on the entry level? Split level plans, measure the house. Frequently the data that is available on a house is not totally accurate on the square footage, so we measure them. And that way it increases the accuracy of it. But we're really more statistical data. What are other homes in the area selling for? Did they have that updated kitchen? Did they have that updated bathroom? What was their floor plan? And whereas the inspector could care less if the kitchen's updated or not.
He's just looking for a kitchen, and he's looking for leaks.
Yeah.
Is the dishwasher going to leak when you turn it on? Kind of a situation.
I've got a question on that. So a consumer gets a home inspection, and let's say the furnace, I don't know, is 15 years old, versus a home that it has a brand new furnace. How does that affect the appraisal? Because you're not a home inspector, you're an appraiser. How do you put a value on an older furnace versus a newer furnace, or does that have any bearing?
It's certainly hard to extrapolate something down to that. You got a 3,000 square foot house and one furnace on another house the same as 10-year variance per se. Very difficult to extrapolate something on it. But if you have an antiquated furnace, even though it's working great, the technology is advancing so fast. A newer furnace will be more efficient, and the market will yield a premium for that usually.
Well, question, do you require, or is it a benefit if you actually have the home inspection in your hands to look at that to see how new that furnace is? And does that help you make a deciding factor at all?
It's a great question. I don't think in my years I've ever been given the home inspection for a host of reasons.
Yes. Yeah.
And but when I go down to look at the furnace, 9 out of 10 times there's the sticker on it when it was installed, so we know. And when they get to high efficiency, you can tell by the PVC coming out of it and so forth. So versus, furnaces I've had that are older, they don't have that. So you can tell the original from the higher grade. And
I get a lot of questions from consumers when an appraiser goes to the home. They go, "Oh my God, the appraiser was only here 15 minutes. How does he know about my home? And why does it take 10 days or a week to get the appraisal?" Can you explain the homework that's done, that it's maybe not so aesthetic, but it's data? Go ahead.
Before we have Mike answer that question, I guess let's explain in layman's terms that what the appraiser's job is to protect the lender and the buyer, that the house is worth what they're paying for it, and that the house meets minimum required lending standards. So the appraiser, he or she is looking at condition overall and will grade it, and then looking to confirm value of the property. That's what the appraiser's job is to do. So, and then, yes, Mike can answer then how you dive into that detail and why an appraisal these days is 30 plus pages of a report versus years ago. I mean, what was it, Mike, 30 years ago? 5 pages maybe?
Maybe when we were sticking photographs on with two-way tape.
Yeah. You had to wait then for them to develop the photos. Remember? Right. Where did you take those back then? Was that
no
Arbor
Polaroids?
Drugs?
No Polaroids back then?
No, we would, and it was funny on my notes here, and Danielle and I go way back. So she remembers it, and it's great, I can remember, and we had probably half a dozen appraisers working for us at one point.
It was a big department there.
And in Brighton, because back then it was still a small town, we had to spread our film developing. It was no digital. You went and got it developed. We had like 4 different places, and we had a full-time runner who did nothing but drop off film, pick up film, and then go to the assessor's office and get the field sheets.
Yes,
was that at like the photo mats about the size of a phone booth, and they were in grocery store parking lots?
We've used them. I can remember the one at 5 of Merriman in Livonia in the day we used it.
I always wonder where that person took a break.
What bathroom?
He just turns his chair. Now I'm on break. Sorry, go ahead.
No. And,
we're sounding old, gentlemen.
Yeah, that's way back. Yeah.
And but one of the things, and we hear, and I totally respect, I think particularly when you come off, the inspector is there 4 hours, and then the appraiser comes through. But before I even get out to the house, for example, Karen, who works with me, has probably got 4 or 5 hours worth of work into that appraisal. And by that, I mean just harvesting the data.
Yeah.
There's
And
so
what
much
do you
out
mean
there.
by harvesting the data? Explain that to our consumers.
One of the great things we have now, and I know you guys know the consumers may not, but it's called BSA, and that ties in directly to the assessor's offices. Most of them in Livingston are connected to it. And so we can get every permit that's been pulled on the house, the dimensions of the house, size of the decks, just about anything. Is it hooked up to the well? Is it hooked up to the septic? Is there sewer at the street? All that's at our fingertips, and just maybe 10 years ago, none of that was out
Legal
there.
description, lot
Yeah,
size, and
right?
that's super important. Legal description super important because not everybody in Livingston County has a lot in a subdivision.
Oh, amen. Right.
You know,
Hey, you brought up one question about permits because I know a guy who actually did some work and finished his basement, but did not pull permits, and I've seen this on different appraisals, whereas, hey, I'm 3.5 bathroom, not 3. What happens there? Do you guys only use what's off public record and permits? Or when you go through and take the pictures and find a different bathroom, do you add that to the grid? What's going on there?
I love that question because you're so right. We will get that all the time. And with how we have to report an appraisal, so that's in compliance with the GSE market, above grade bathroom and bedrooms have to be separated from the basement. So they immediately go, if they have a bathroom in the basement, you say you only have 3.5 baths or something. But we have to, and it's a great way of doing it. You should separate basement area from above grade. And so when they just glance it, in the one column, it shows above grade, and the next column shows below grade. But unfortunately, it doesn't spell out bathroom. It just says 1.0, BR or whatever it may be. And that's where that confusion comes from. But if they read it thoroughly and have someone explain it to them a little bit, they'll see the photos are on there, and we still give them value for that. And it's a good process because that way you're not double dipping the square footage and the bathroom counts and stuff, and it's much more accurate.
so have you noticed? And I don't know that you go on Zillow frequently, but I don't have access to RealComp, so I'm on Zillow almost every day just to look up a property. If a client calls and says, "Hey, I need numbers on this house," I'm going to go to the internet and whatever pulls up, whether it's Realtor.com or Zillow. Zillow is now combining above grade and below grade square footage.
Thus taking the impression of the consumer saying my house is worth a hell of a lot more
Right.
than it actually is.
I think so. And that just happened, honestly, in the last couple months. That has not been a thing. And I think that that's going to confuse consumers, going to confuse realtors, the like, And I've also seen a difference with even the MLS where the realtors appear to be. I don't know if it's the system adding the square footage together or it's just they're putting it out there that way. But a lot of the listings are showing homes, it's 3,600 square feet. Well, that's including the basement, which is extremely confusing.
I think from our standpoint, what's changed so much in the market in the last few years is I remember when I was taking my classes, I sound old back in the day, but you'd go to, you'd take them at Michigan State University. I went to Indiana University, and you'd spend 2 weeks. Yeah. You get a hotel room, you spent your 2 weeks, and that's how it was. But the professor that taught it back then said a good appraiser is part detective. Yeah. And I say it all the time, and everyone I've ever trained, I say the same thing. You got to investigate it, and it's not that the realtors deliberately, by any means, do anything wrong, but it may be incorrect. They could be told incorrectly. Right. So if you want to be accurate, you better be digging deep on it.
Right.
But what's the problem when there's a host of problems come up if they combine that area. One is on my search for comps, for example, let's say I have a 2,000 square foot house ranch, and someone has 2,000 square foot house ranch with a finished basement. Now they got a 4,000 square foot house. My search parameters may not even catch that. Mm-hmm. And we all know realtors will say frequently a house in this area is worth 200 a square foot. And that's what the consumer's going to hear. Then they think their house is worth double.
Yeah.
So
what
you're
it
the bad
is.
guy in a lot of cases. And that goes to show about, because it's really the realtors, because they set the stage on the sale price to give what they consider marketability. And then you're given a reality check based off of real data.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it that the realtor's the bad guy on it. I think they're doing what they feel is right.
Yeah.
My dad was a realtor, so put me through college. No, it's just what we deal with. It's nothing personal. It's just it's a lot of time. I believe possibly the consumers wants it in the MLS to save $4,000, and maybe they yield to that. And it doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, and it causes a heck of a lot of trouble. And but I would say the importance of accuracy is, for us, is everything.
Right.
You
Well,
gotta be
you're
accurate.
following a national standard and an appraisal code.
Right.
And yes, you have had an extensive amount of education, and also, just to maintain a license. I mean, appraisers are an interesting profession that I hate to say, because you and I have had this conversation the last couple of years. It's a bit of a dying breed, because it is the only, we're licensed as loan officers. Realtors have to take classes and also get licensed. But there is not any professional in our industry other than the appraiser that has the amount of education that is required, and an apprenticeship that basically you have to have before you even get your level 1 license.
Correct.
And then, what is it? Over 2,000 hours that you're supposed to work under somebody, or?
I don't, because of my age, I guess, I don't know what the apprenticeship, I'll tell you what mine was. And it was, you spent 3 years in an office doing the work, going with the guys, gals, whatever, and then they cut you loose. 3 years.
Wow.
Before you walk through a house by yourself.
Wow.
And, but I'm grateful for it, because I learned so much. You didn't make a lot of money, but I was very blessed, and
the fact that you stuck with it that
Yeah.
long to become such an expert at it is amazing. But we really have nobody coming into this industry because of the licensing and the requirements. I think now, somebody had recently told me that there's over 2,000 hours that a new appraiser has to work under a licensed appraisal. And that's pretty much unpaid. I mean, that's like working free for a year. That's not even a good apprenticeship. I mean, I'm like, it's just the craziest thing. So
Not even an internship.
No, not even an internship. And we've, you and I have discussed, Mike, that, where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years when the average age of the appraiser right now is, what is that?
I think it's right. I'm 61, and I think the average age is probably 59 or something close to that.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for loan officers. And you go,
Is it?
Yeah, the average age in the state of Michigan of a loan officer is 59.
Really? So I'm below average.
You're below average, and I'm a little below
good.
average.
Yeah. For
I like
another
to
30 days anyway.
Yeah. So,
Happy birthday.
so yeah, it's interesting to see that. And you go, okay, where are we going to be in 5 years? Because in an area like ours in Livingston County, we don't have cookie cutter subdivisions for the most part. We have a lot of unique properties, and most of our clients getting mortgages need appraisals. So any buyer that has a government mortgage, which is FHA, VA, rural development, they are required to have an appraisal. Conventional loans, I want to say 80% of them are required to have an appraisal. That's a lot of appraisals needed. And even if you look, for instance, in the Detroit market, where we do have areas such as Livonia, Westland, Farmington, where there are a lot of subdivisions and similar homes, you're still dealing in many cases with these first-time home buyers. They're not putting, they're putting low money down. They're going to need appraisals. The only time we get something called a property inspection waiver is for strong borrowers with excellent credit scores in a property that's probably cookie cutter or was just appraised in the last couple of years.
And conventional financing.
And conventional financing. So that is, very few of the loans that we don't require appraisals.
Right. Well, you brought up the difference between the conventional, conforming appraisal and the government appraisals. Mike, could you touch a little bit, because the government appraisals also require a health and safety inspection that goes along with that. Can you explain what that is to our consumers?
Sure. HUD requires for FHA, RD, so forth, certain safety items. And it's a great practice to have that, to have these basic safety items. And it can be anywhere from handrails on stairs that extend too far, a deck that is above 32 inches, that kind of thing to call out. One of the most common ones I get is the discharge pipe on a hot water tank.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
at one point, I literally carried them in my car and would give them to them. It's a $5
kidding.
thing, and you hate to come out and charge them,
For a
to
reinspection,
look at,
yeah.
but you have to.
Yeah.
And it's a PVC pipe, and so anyhow, at one point it was just easier to give them to them, and
So they're looking for handrails, they're looking for decks that are too high, cracked and peeling paint.
yes,
What are some of the other items? Because these type items can stop financing debt in its tracks if they're not fixed prior to closing in 90% of the cases there. So what are the top 5 items that you look for on a government appraisal?
that's a great question. I love that. The discharge pipe, scrape and paint, and that's a good one, particularly if we get into lead-based paint. And, we certainly don't want anyone to get hurt. That's just the bottom line. Railings on decks. The other one, a lot of people, don't talk about, and I just had this the other day, had to run out to Perry to help a good mutual builder friend of ours on something. And no firewall on the house.
All between the garage and the house?
Yes. And I get that, because us being in Halbright and these older homes, and back in the day, right, we would just throw the garage on with our buddies, and didn't know. But we have to look for like a firewall. And I think that's one I always feel very good to catch, if you will, because, we don't want anyone to get hurt. That's the bottom line.
Isn't it required to have smoke detectors?
No.
No.
Really?
Now let's go over that.
Really?
This will stir up a lot of controversy.
Hey, that's what we're here for.
Well, I've seen that condition on an
Christmas.
appraisal before.
And you've seen carbon monoxide, and in
Yes.
California it is required by HUD. The smoke detector is not required by HUD, nor is a GFI. However,
Wait a minute, GFIs? Because we get hit on that all the time with
it's up
GFIs.
it is up to the appraiser and the lender. And for me, my philosophy is I don't stray from the HUD handbook.
But if it's not in the HUD handbook for ground fault interrupters, how can an appraiser ping us for that and require it to be updated?
They feel that it's a safety hazard. And quite honestly, I think possibly, some of them don't know.
Well, we had something that popped up a few years ago, and I remember talking to you about this the last couple of years, where it was FHA. There was a change in the FHA guideline that stated that there had to be appliances in the house. And then that also backed down within a short period of time to go, wait a minute, that technically an appliance is considered personal property unless it's permanently installed. You're going to tell me an FHA buyer can't buy a house without, a refrigerator or a washer and dryer when they could go to a store and buy it themselves. So that was a weird thing that had popped up. And I think you and I had talked about it a couple of years ago, and you're like, no, that's not really what how it's written. But it was an interpretation issue. And then I think if a lender, who knows, right? If a lender interpreted it, if the appraiser interpreted it, and then it was just like, oh yeah, here's what we have to do. And it's like, no, that's not required.
I thought because they would say you need a food prep area and a food storage area. So what is the bottom line on government financing? Do we need a fridge and a
No, you don't need appliances. Those are
dishwasher?
personal property. No.
And a washer and dryer? Of course not.
No.
Okay. What about a microwave that is attached and it's overhead above the stove?
It's not. None of that is required.
Okay.
However,
As I see an asterisk coming on here.
However, as I'm sure you guys are fully aware of, they've the powers to be, if you will, have shifted certain responsibilities to us. One would be, for example, we get government financing, HUD, FHA, what have you. The washer and dryer included, we have to test it.
Really?
Microwave
So you
included?
take a bag of laundry with you?
I take a couple biscuits, throw it in the microwave. And it really is to the chagrin of us as appraisers.
Yeah, how are you? I mean, just because it operates, what if you break it? What if it?
But the washer and dryer too, you got to test?
If it's included in the PA. Yeah.
I can see you sitting there naked with all your clothes in the washer waiting for him to cycle.
He brings just dirty socks. Oh, dear Lord. And I mean, some of that's ridiculous, don't you think? You go, come on.
Some of it's interpretation because, one of the things that's changed recently, that they were saying, well, only if you give it value. But I know, like the lenders that we work, specifically you have to have that in there that, yes, I tested these things. And, of course, I put a disclaimer on. I'm not an expert in appliances. But we test it and do it.
I mean, I could see running the dishwasher,
Faucet.
But in running a faucet,
Okay.
but the washer and dryer, how do you know that really works?
Wait, let me get this straight here. So if it's included in the purchase agreement, you have to determine a value. You have to check them to make sure they work.
If we're assigning a value to it, let's say an appraiser does, which if it's personal property, you really shouldn't. But one of the recent interpretations, you know how this goes back and forth sometimes, and is if you're assigning it value, and even if you're not, though, but the lenders have all kind of drawn the line and said, nope, we want you checking it. And at least that's everyone I deal with.
And if there's no value,
doesn't matter, we check it.
You check it.
Just to cover yourself so
just
that
in
nobody
case.
calls.
Yeah. So you take a picture of it turned on, those kind of things. And,
Let me ask you a question, Mike. So in your opinion, what percentage of the appraisal is opinion and what is data driven? Because I personally feel, and we talked about this yesterday, we talked about, we'll see a purchase agreement in there, and let's say it's a $300,000 purchase, but now we're seeing, and the buyer agrees to escalate up to $310,000. So you as an appraiser see this contract, it's at 300, but they're escalating to pay 10,000 over up to 310. Does that have any bearing on how you look at a property, seeing that they're shooting for 310,000?
It doesn't. It's very difficult in this COVID or post-COVID market. Danielle, you've been in a long time. Victor, you have too, obviously. We've never seen anything like this.
No.
I have never seen a market move so fast, so quickly. And in my entire career, I've always done extremely well with vacant land, 80 acres, 100 acres. That's kind of my niche out there. Land has always been very stable. Even land now, you can almost flip it. That's never happened.
We see multiple offers on vacant land now, for God's sake.
Can you believe that? And it's just crazy. So when we see that, we do the best that we can to stay current. The more recent the data, the better. But I would still go back to a year and look at stuff. And
the hard thing I think right now is a time adjustment on a comp from a year ago. One of the things that Vic and I have talked about in several recent podcasts, we actually had on, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? We had Barry Habib on the show. And Barry Habib is a mortgage guru that we have followed for over 20 years. He used to be an originator, and he runs a company now called MBS Highway that we use as a company to help us monitor the bond market and what's going to happen with interest rates. And he's really, this guru mortgage economist. And I heard Barry speak 4 years ago, and he had told us at this conference that the generation to watch right now is the millennials. Okay. They're between 24 and 39, I think, or 36. And they're bigger than the baby boomers. So there's, what did we say? How many? 48 million?
Yep.
48 million millennials. The average age of the first-time home buyer right now is 31 to 33, which is much older than probably all of us owning homes. And if we looked at a chart, we'll have to email this to you because it's really cool to see. I don't think you have it on your phone right now, Vic. But if you look at the data of how many of these millennials are going to be turning 31 to 33, We're in a 9-year cycle. We're 4 years into a 9-year cycle. And the last four, it looks like this, okay? Every year there's going to be more and more of these millennials hitting that 31 to 33-year-old age group. So when we look at the real estate market where it is, we know that, we didn't build for about 10 years because of the recession of '08. And we're just talking about people that are already here. Now, we're not talking about any immigrants, no immigration, nobody coming from other countries. We are talking about people that are here, that have grown up in America, that are forming households. And that is the main reason for the shortage. Now, did COVID impact the real estate market last year? Absolutely, right? Because guess what? Now people are working at home. They're homeschooling their children. Now that 3-bedroom house is not big enough. They need 4 bedrooms, a den. They want to get out of the subdivision. Or now they're working from home permanently and they don't need to live in a certain location. They're going, where do I want to be? Not where do I have to be? Okay. And then we've got couple that with record low interest rates. So you look at that, and it based on, Barry told us 4 years ago that we could have predicted the recession in '08 if we would have looked at the birth rate 25 years earlier. So there was an actual huge drop in the birth rate in this country in the 1970s. Okay, think about it. Think about when, use Livonia as an example, because Livonia is similar to a suburb in Chicago that I grew up in. Remember in Livonia that there used to be an elementary school every mile, right? They built Livonia in the 50s and the 60s, post-World War II. That's when the baby boomers were coming up through school, and there were so many children that they built these neighborhoods, they built all these houses, they built parks, they built schools. Fast forward 25, 30 years, and then we started to see in the late 70s and the early 80s, a big recession, but B, we also saw them closing those schools. So those schools became senior centers, community centers, a preschool, instead of an elementary school or something of that nature because of the change of the demographic. So if you look at the current cycle we're in, as much as we want to say, oh, it's crazy, it's the pandemic, right? All of this stuff. No, it's the millennials, and they're huge, and it's only going to continue. In fact, I read an article this week about Michigan universities, okay? Universities, including, my son goes to Grand Valley. So this particular article was about Grand Valley, but it also addressed the majority of the schools in the state of Michigan, with the exception of U of M and MSU. They're on a 5-year decline, right? Where there's less and less students, young adults, going to college right after high school. And it's sharp. Now, yes, part of that has to do with the pandemic. Maybe kids are going to community colleges, they're working, but we also have to think about the birth rate, okay? The Gen Zs after the millennials, which are my 2 younger kids. So I have 2 millennials and I have 2 Gen Zs at home. They're slightly smaller than the millennials. So the reason the universities are seeing a decline in enrollment is based on the demographics. There weren't as many children born. They're just coming off of these millennials, which is the biggest generation ever. So of course there were more kids in the schools and, more kids going to college.
They're about 7, 8 years out from hitting that prime age of buying homes.
Correct. But the younger generation is smaller than the millennials. So that's why the universities are feeling it now, and that generation's not small. It's almost as big as the millennials. So when we look at this and go, okay, where is real estate going? Regardless of interest rates would have to go up pretty high for people to stop buying because rents are going up so much. These buyers want homes. They want homes.
Well, a little bit backtracking on that as you talk about the millennials and growth rate there in America. It's because in 1973 we had Roe versus Wade, and now they legalized abortion, right? In 1973 we just seen this huge decline in the birth rates, right? Through 74, 75 to 80. And then what happens, you go 33 years ahead, that's 2006, right? Where all this growth rate, right, is declining. And what had happened in 2006, they seen we have less people, but we have all this inventory. And that's when the government says, well, hey, you know what? We need more home ownership. Let's give some creative financing. Let's get that guy who cuts grass for $300,000 a year. Let's give him a 100% loan, and started doing all that bad lending. Everything started to blow up, and we had too much inventory. Everything went to hell at that point. But now, as we fast forward now with the inventory, it is now 2021. These are the kids born in 1986, where that we know we were growing up in population. And so now we have this population, huge growth, but now because of the pandemic, because of the recession, all that building, all that financing went away. So now we're about, 4 million homes short in the country right now, and we only have the capacity to build about 1 million. And so this isn't getting any better anytime soon. So we're looking at least, 5 years?
So 5 potential more years where the demand is going to exceed the supply. And then if you have, for instance, we've got the baby boomers, which is a very wealthy generation. They're not giving up their homes. They're staying. They're buying second homes. Some of you might have 3 homes.
Yeah, they're not making their money in the bond market, a very conservative nature. So they said, hell, let's pull the money out and let's go buy a home in Florida. Let's go buy a second home. Let's go buy an investment property and take advantage of this appreciation, thus taking up that inventory. So it's going to be some good years, I guess, in our markets.
Yeah, so don't retire yet, Mike.
Yeah.
I told you that a couple years ago.
A lot more
I'm
appraisals.
Like, just keep going. Karen can help. It's all good.
Yeah.
We have a problem finding appraisers. We honestly do. We've had so much explosive growth in our office in the last couple years. That's been one of my biggest challenges as a manager, making sure that we have qualified people on our panel.
Well, Mike, let's dive into this market since we're talking about this. Overpaying, paying above appraised value, multiple offer situations. What's your take on this? What's your gut with all your experience? What do you think is going on here and all that?
It's, supply and demand. It scares me, though. You guys see it all the time, right? Where it's $50,000 over list, and the list price was setting a new record. And they come in $50,000 or something, and you're going, gosh, it's going to take them a while to be at a break-even point because they have a appraisal waiver or whatever, so much down it doesn't matter what I say on it. And it does concern me, that, do they have an equity position in that? And so it's concerning, but it's the market. I can't tell you how many houses I've appraised and you're going, gosh, that's kind of high. And then in 30 days, it's like, yeah, that's not bad.
No, yeah, exactly. Because once a house closes, it's a comp. You go, okay. So, but I have also seen some agents list on the low side. So one of our team members bought a house a couple months back. She has been looking for a ranch in Brighton for 4 years. She ended up not finding what she was looking for 4 years ago, bought a house, lived in it, upgraded it, and decided, you know what, it wasn't a ranch. She's like, she wants this ranch. So she started looking again. And I told her, I said, here's how you're going to have to be aggressive. Well, she finally found a house. And I think it was in Brighton, Genoa Township, near Mount Brighton, somewhat walking distance to town, and she wanted an acre. That was the other thing. You can't get that in the newer subdivisions. The land is so much smaller. But she wanted to renovate the home. She didn't want it perfect. Like, she wanted to come in. She was good. Kitchens, bathrooms, whatever. She was going to come in and customize this home for exactly what her and her husband want. Well, the house was listed for, I think, $300,000. It was an over 2,000 square foot ranch on an acre. Now, I know the area because I kind of live in that corridor and I watch everything. And when she saw the house and was going to go look at it, she knew it was going to be multiple bids. I said, this is listed too low. And she was like, really? And I pulled the comps. Again, I just go to Zillow. I'm like, look at the neighborhood. They had stuff that sold up to $385 in that neighborhood. She went over asking, got it, and the house appraised without a problem. But that was an odd situation that I have seen several homes where I think the listing agents listed on the light side of where the average is to kind of get more people attention. I had a buyer that wrote $100,000 over asking on a farmhouse in the Gregory area. And now the buyers had money. They didn't care. And I was like, oh, how is this going to go? Where is this going to appraise? If it doesn't appraise at least list price, we're in trouble. So I go again to Zillow and pull the sold data. And that house appraised for exactly what they bought it for. So that again was listed ridiculously low, but it sold fast, over asking, in an absolute crazy situation. You go, well, that's never been a thing, in my opinion. So I don't know if you've seen that much where you go, what were they thinking? Or do you think it's just like it's a strategy that, in my opinion, it really shifted in the market when we had the bank-owned crisis back in 2008, 2010, 2011. Banks owning property changed real estate, because they would be bidding online and things of that nature, or the bank would wait for the bids to come in, right? They would go, okay, everybody submit your bids. We're gonna hold all offers for 5 days and decide who's the best. When in real estate, that was never a thing. And now that we're in a traditional market, that's what the realtors do. They're gonna hold all offers for 3 to 5 days, see who comes in strongest. And you go, okay, are we creating this crazy cycle,
The realtors are very savvy, aren't they, with marketing? And I agree. There's a few of them. I think they do a great job, but they'll come in slightly low on that.
And create a drive for
and it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Well, they're representing their seller. I also always hear the argument, well, it's what it's worth and what you think it's worth. And if I'm willing to pay that, isn't it worth that? And the question is no, because if the bank has to foreclose basically on it and resell this property, can they recoup their costs there? So, but I'm a little concerned about values. They just keep going up. They keep going up. But yet affordability is still, with the rates they are, it's actually cheaper to buy that house today than it was 25 years ago.
Or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's 3 years ago. My daughter bought a house in Howell 3 years ago. And they were first-time home buyers. They bought it rural development, and it needed some work. They've done a lot of work to the house. But I was able to refinance her twice in the last 2 years. You had done one of the appraisals, but we lowered their payment $300 in 3 years. And the funny thing is, they decided to move and just put it on the market. And, they're going to do very well. So I'll be anxious to see when that appraisal comes in. But I had even appraised it again. Oh, no, I think you appraised it last year. Then I refied them again this year, got a PIW because you had just appraised it. And,
right.
Fannie knew what the averages were. But, I would have never thought in 3 years that they'd sell the house for what they just sold it for. But they put a lot of work into it. So, it'll be interesting to see.
Good pocket, too, where they're at.
Yes.
Because they're on the cord or
Yes. Yep, right off.
Very popular, yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question, and to see if you've run into this often. One of the things that the realtors popped up this summer with, a few of them, was to get creative with an offer. They would have the buyer offer to pay the seller's closing cost. Have you run across that? And I've it's a really interesting angle. But I look at it as a reverse concession, right? Instead of a seller giving a buyer the concession towards closing costs or something of that nature, now we have the buyer giving the seller a concession. And I know that based on an appraisal standard, if the seller is giving a concession, we basically knock that off the purchase price. So if the house is $300,000 and the seller's giving the buyer $5,000, then you as the appraiser are going to take that into account. Have you seen this pop up in the last 6 months? And my concern with that whole process is then we're really not appraising the houses for what the buyer's paying for it. It's almost like a cash incentive because the Real Comp is going to post that, yeah, they paid $300,000 for that house, but they really gave the seller $310,000 because they paid some of the seller's closing cost. And how could that impact appraisals in the future? Because we're not given a sales price. We're creating this artificial veil, so to speak.
It's a tough call because we're seeing, for example, on a lot of that, like you say, when it gets to the comp book, we're not going to know that.
Right.
We'll get seller concessions reported, but the buyers...
Real Comp doesn't report any of the buyer concessions.
Right. So, which we've never seen. I've never seen it anyways. And I'll give you an example. I was at a Remax Platinum and that came up, and boy, it was very interesting conversation on it. Like, how's this going to impact us? Is it artificial inflation and, all these things? And then someone had brought up, the market, and whether it's there now or not, but there was a listing agent came out from Livonia area, list a house in Juneau, red hot pocket. Mm-hmm. And not only was he not going to charge that person a commission, he's going to get the buyer to pay his commission.
Whoa.
And that, I thought their hair was going to catch on fire at Remax.
Well, let's digress a little bit. So
Sure.
let's just take a $300,000 listing. And in order for a buyer to compete, he says, I will pay the seller's transfer tax, the owner's policy, and the buyer agent commission. And let's say that's $20,000, right? Because if the seller is going to sell it for $300,000 as he was listing it, he would have paid all that himself, okay? But now that the buyer's paying that $20,000 extra dollars, technically, wouldn't that sale should be $320,000 because that's what he's really paying for it? But now they're going to record the sale at $300,000, so now the township's out of extra taxes. And what's it really selling for? I don't know if that's a slippery slope, or where you take that $300,000 property and say, look, buyer's going to pay $20,000 worth of the seller's cost, whether it's commission, transfer tax, and all that. So technically, that $300,000 house, they're going to put it on paper for $280,000, but the buyer's going to pay all that stuff outside of closing. And now that sale is recorded at $280,000 to the township. And now that buyer pays less taxes, property taxes going forward, because it's registered at $280,000.
Well, I'm more concerned about where the future comps go. If you have a neighborhood and you got 6 homes sold in a year, okay, and 2 of them had buyer concessions to the seller, they could look like a lower price sale.
Right.
And now we don't have the comps that you thought you had, but you as the appraiser is not going to find this out unless somebody told you, because it's not categorized in Real Comp as a concession.
Yeah, that's right. Because if we had 4 of those $300,000 properties and 2 of them
went for $320,000 technically.
Well, yeah, or the buyer said, nope, I'm going to give you $280,000, but I'm paying all this other stuff out of the side, right?
Yeah, then you just trashed the comps in the market because they were worried about an appraisal.
Because you would only see that they sold for $280,000, and that would hurt the other 2 $300,000 properties, would they not?
One of the things when I was talking with the realtors on this, and I think this is great conversation. So in a typical sale, let's say 6%, right?
Right.
Does it matter who's paying for it? It's 6% is a reasonable and customary fee involved with the transaction. So, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but
right.
it's still that 6%.
But is that 6% baked into the sale price? And
well,
because it's typical and normal?
Typical and normal. Yes, it's baked into the sales price. And yes, it's typically, right, the seller's expense to sell. But correct, you look at it and go, okay, technically a buyer can pay the commission. And that's been legit for, honestly, 25 years. We just don't see it in this area. But then the question comes into the financing is, okay, if the buyer's paying for it, how do we write the contract? What are we appraising the house at? And how do we work this into the buyer's expenses? I mean, technically the buyer could just pay the commission or half of the commission, but we're not going to roll it into the loan. We're going to base the purchase agreement or the purchase structure the loan off of the purchase agreement and then subsequently what the appraisal comes in at.
Agreed.
It's
going to be
a little bit of a slippery slope.
Well, let me
because I don't think the realtors, for instance, that are doing all the buyer concessions situation, I don't think they're realizing how they're going to affect the comparables. when we would expect, okay, yep, you sell a house in April and then another house sells in October, you expect it to be just a little bit higher, right? Based on market trends and, where purchase, where property increases are going.
Yeah, you just had me. I just went off on a tangent, but I'm thinking like, so what if, or why do we submit a purchase agreement to an appraisal with the purchase price on there? Because now, if we submitted a purchase agreement with only what's included and no sales price, now we get an objective view. What's the appraised value of this house? There is no number on there that you're shooting for. How would that affect an appraisal?
I think I speak for most appraisers. We're not shooting for a number.
Okay.
But I agree with you. There's a reality to this. We are aware of what the sale price is. And I just think from my perspective, what I like about that is the value is the value, but if I'm coming low, I'm still an old school appraiser, and if the lender allows me, I'm going to talk to that listing agent. I can't tell them what I'm at, but can you show me your evidence? Can you got to have that conversation. And so, yeah.
I don't think we don't want the appraisers to have the purchase agreement. The appraiser's job is to confirm value, right? You're not necessarily going out there to say, did they list this properly? You're going out there to say, is this house worth at least this amount? Yeah. And that's one question that we get a lot from consumers is, well, this, for instance, if you let's say you get a great deal on a house. You pay $350 for a house, and the houses in the neighborhood are selling for $400. The buyers will get aggravated if it comes in at $350. They're like, well, that house has got to be worth more. Well, it is. Look at the comps. You can see it. But the appraiser's job is just to confirm value. It's not necessarily to set an actual market price. Well, at least if it's for a mortgage purpose. I mean, it could be different if you're, for instance, let's say somebody calls you and says, we're going through a divorce, or if there's an estate sale situation, then that's a different type of appraisal, correct? Where you're going out there saying, okay, this is what this house is worth today in this market.
Fair market value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Typically, the divorce case, let's say I go out to the house, whether it's divorce case or sale, the value is the value as of that date.
Correct.
But you're right. For an example, frequently we're doing an estate one right now, and it's kind of complicated, but we're doing a retro. So 2009, we got to put a value on it as of that date, because that's when the person passed. So, and that comes up a fair amount.
Wow. Yeah. So you got to go backwards?
Yes. And now, in the computer world we live in, right, digital, that data is frequently purged. And we've, over the years, have collected all the books, just kept them, but they've eventually quit printing them. So kind of going off the thing here, but when you're using the book, analog, if you will, right? So now you can't fill out your appraisal report. It's all manually typed in, and you're researching it, the data. So it is so labor intensive.
Yeah.
So that was an estate sale, and somehow there's a court battle since 2009 or something, and then they got to go back to that date to establish.
It's usually for accounting purposes. So if that person passed in 2009, it's always the date of passing on an estate.
Okay.
And it has to do with capital gains tax and stuff like that. And then finally, who knows what happens? I don't know. But now, someone in the family who's been sitting in that house usually is going to buy it and has to buy out the heirs to it.
Wow.
Yep.
Question about appraisal disputes. We've had a discussion in the past about, realtors or clients disputing the value of the house. How does that mechanism work? And is it legit? Do you look at it? How does one proceed to do something like that?
I from my standpoint, I feel you always have to respect people and hear what they have to say. I mean, how are you going to know if you agree with it or not unless you hear from them? And I think one of the mistakes we've made after the housing crisis, for example, like us talking. I remember a few years ago, Danielle, we were even questioning, maybe 10 years ago, we were at the women's council or something. We were like, can we even talk? And I'm just grateful right now we're having this conversation, because I'm learning more than you can imagine just sitting down and listening to two veterans talk about this. and I appreciate it. So when someone has a dispute, as the appraiser, you got to stop everything, look at it, respond to it. But that's our job. You got to show respect to them and go, all right, let's, this is why. And I think it's important to be, again, just respectful to whether it's the realtors, the purchasers, or whatever. And it's our chance really to set forward a why and how. And sometimes they may not agree with it, but I hope they respect it.
Right. One of the great classes that you did a few years back, I think it was at a women's council event, was teaching realtors how to comp a house, how to prepare and present data on a listing, and also how to communicate with an appraiser, right? Because people, I think, and especially now, particularly 2021, people are very emotional. And we can't be emotional always in a business situation. It needs to be logical. We need to look at it. We might not always agree with the appraiser or the agent or whomever, right? Or an underwriter in our world, but you do have to look at it professionally and go, there are things that the listing agent can do to prepare for the appraisal. And one of the things that I struggle with, because I can see it. And, I remember actually wanting to be an appraiser. When I got in the mortgage business for a few years, I thought, okay, I was a processor, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll be an appraiser someday. And I actually looked into taking classes. This was the early 90s, and I ended up not going in that direction. But, so I'm probably bad because I am like that, wannabe appraiser 32 years later. But there are a lot of agents don't really comp out the house. They just look at it and go, oh, well, it's worth this much a square foot. Boom, here's what we're going to list it for. And that's when I see we have problems, because I look at it and go, and this actually happened with a purchase I had earlier this year for a family member in the West Bloomfield corridor. I don't know that market as well as I know Livingston County, and was overbid, guaranteed appraisal, So again, I go to my little Zillow tool because that's all I got. And I look at the comps and I go, oh no. This ain't good. This is not good. And the appraisal didn't even come in at the list price, so we ended up closing the deal. That was a little painful, but it cost the buyer some money, and you go, okay, but how did we get there? Because it was spring, the market was just turning, but you have to look back. If we're looking back 6 months, we're looking to the fall of 2020, for comps, when these agents in the spring are coming out with sometimes all these numbers that you go, okay, you got to be able to document it. Look at the comps, and if there has been major work done to the home, the appraiser needs to know that, right? You need to know, is there been a new roof, kitchen, total remodel, what is new here that changed, and why is this different from the neighbor's house that sold for $50,000 less?
Well, for example, if someone got a new roof, and is it better for them to actually just provide the receipt that, hey, I dumped $15,000 into a new roof, or do you just have a box and you say, oh, newer roof, and you give it X amount of money?
One of the things that we do, let's just go to refis, for example, and Karen will call them, and we set up, and we always tell them, before we come out, if you think about it, if you could write down everything you've done to the house, and we literally say this, even if it's a new doorbell. And the reason being is they'll forget sometimes that they've done other things. I can't tell you how many times they'll say, well, I painted this room, and meanwhile, you got all new Pella windows, and they just forgot.
Yeah.
So we try and get them to start thinking about it. What have you done? And frequently, if someone has a new roof, in my experience, they've also done other things.
Yes.
So it's not always easy to extrapolate a roof, but usually that particular homeowner collectively has done a lot of things to the house. More times than not, it's not going to be new roof and everything else is original. They've done the new roof, the kitchen, the bath, and that is easier to support value with, because the reason this house is at the higher end of the spectrum is, and has all these things. So,
and that's an opinion or a grid that you pop this stuff into?
Yeah, it's a grid, and we can actually, with the new forms, newer quality of construction, and I preferred the older forms where we could have line items for that. And I really liked it, but now you kind of lump it as Q3, Q4, those kind of things.
Isn't that fun? That drives me nuts.
Oh,
I'm not a fan of that either.
I
All the new forms we have to learn, but
Right.
you can't teach
They're
old
changing
dogs
again.
new tricks. Yeah.
So I did a refinance a couple of years ago, and my wife says, "Oh, don't have the appraiser come over tomorrow. The house is dirty." And I said, "Oh, you know what? Oh, I better cut the lawn too. Yeah, let's clean up the house." Does a clean house or a groomed lawn, curb appeal, does that have an effect on anything when it comes to appraising?
I believe it does to some degree because
Well, that would be an opinion then, not a grid, right?
agreed.
Okay.
But I'll give you an example, not but. For example, as you guys know, let's say my client is out of Ohio, Texas, whatever, the underwriter, right? And I go, this house is worth at the higher end, and the beds aren't made, it's trash, the lawn's 3 foot high. You know what I mean?
Oh, because the pictures go to the underwriter.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're a visual society still. And I feel that if it photographs well, that it's just beneficial for everybody. And in fact, I do a PowerPoint where I praised a house, and I think it was Nancy Hubble. And it was a killer house, just beautiful. And I get out there to praise it. And it happens, don't get me wrong. But I don't know. It was just trashed. Great house. Not dirty or anything, just
They had a rough day.
they had a rough day. And, and you're sending these photos on a $750,000 house, and it's like, ooh, boy. And but fortunately, a good underwriter can look past it. Good appraisers will look past certain things.
So, so you're telling me if I want to get my house clean, I just got to text my wife and let her know appraiser's coming over? Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, man.
No, but one of the things that I think is important for consumers to understand is what impacts value from improvements and how it could affect the appraisal. So, for instance, yes, a new roof is going to add value to the home, but I guess some of that is maintenance, right? I mean, you can't let a house go 30 years in Michigan without putting a roof on, because then that is actually a huge issue. And it doesn't mean that, for instance, putting a new roof on is you're not going to necessarily get dollar for dollar for that improvement, because it's your responsibility as a homeowner to keep the house up. Versus, for instance, a kitchen. I mean, you can take a standard kitchen out of a house and really upgrade that, and that is going to add value because it changes the overall condition. Or paint colors, Paint is kind of subjective, right? Some people want all the gray and the white. Some people want the beige, but somebody else wants orange and blue and green in their house, And right now we know that the buyers are going to be drawn to the neutral palette, right? So that's going to help sell it. But due to the lack of inventory, most buyers are going to not care about paint. But again, the paint, unless it's dramatically deficient, that wouldn't impact value a ton, would it? I mean, can you kind of give us some guidance there?
No, it's a great question. I think for me, one of the things that's been consistent in the real estate market, though, is cosmetic upgrades are super important. House should be clean. It should be as neutral as you want. Get the clutter off the kitchen countertops. Those kind of things will impact the consumer. It's more forgiving now.
Right.
And I'll hear, well, that and we've seen it. The dining room's painted purple, and it really didn't matter. Well, we don't know because you didn't have it in a neutral color, so we really don't know what impact it had. So when they say those kind of things, we didn't put our best foot forward on the house.
Right.
And I agree with you that frequently we'll have the roof question, and if it's the house is 20 years old or whatever, it should have a new roof, but it's still better than the house that doesn't. Right.
Right.
So we try to extrapolate that. But one of the things before I came out here, I was writing on my notes is how fast interior design is changing our market is unbelievable. And I've never seen it before, where I was talking to a realtor friend of mine, and it was a very high-end house over on Charan. And the house was like maybe 10 years old. They already went through and gutted it, all new kitchens, bathrooms. And I'm using a comp from that street. Beautiful, right? And they had the original stuff, very high end. And it's amazing the difference when you look at it.
Right. Because I think buyers are looking at it knowing how expensive it is to do that work. And they're looking at it going, I'd rather pay higher price for a house, roll it into the mortgage, than have to put 50 or 100 grand into a house after you move in. And then, because then you got to live through all that.
Well, and it's something, because I asked some potential buyers out there, the younger millennials, and I thought this was a great line. The knock is you hear that, they don't want to do the sweat equity like an old guy like me did.
Yeah,
still
with
would do.
the steaming wallpaper off the wall.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it. And I thought because they're so smart, the younger generation is incredibly intelligent. And they go, why would I do that when I can get a 2.7 interest rate and have it already done versus getting a 20% loan through the kitchen remodel place? And I go, okay. Yeah.
Well, it is even in our world, because we do have renovation loans. And guess what? They are higher interest rates and they're higher fees, because and then here's the problem, because people are calling about renovation loans. In order to do this renovation loan, you typically have 6 months after closing of the loan to get the work done. That's not realistic in this market.
We can't get
contractors out. So people aren't going to, or they're not going to use a 203K loan for a renovation in most cases, because the seller's not going to wait for a contractor to get bids. We can't get a contractor to do the work in 6 months. So if the buyer's going to buy the house, we've got to come up with plan B contingencies so they can do renovations after closing. So yeah, it's crazy versus, 10 years ago, you could have done, we did 203K loans like crazy, because why? The banks would wait. The houses were trashed, and there are some houses that are not in great condition, even at all price points, with my kids looking in the market this past year, with both of my older daughters have sold and are buying this year. It's really interesting, really, really interesting to look at some of these homes and going, okay, why would somebody list it like that? Yeah. Well, I sold a house 3 years ago, just 3 years ago in Hamburg Township, and we had been there 25 years. So I did renovate the kitchen. I repainted. I put all new flooring in while we lived through it as we were building a house, right? It was kind of a nightmare, but it took me 90 days to sell the house. I mean, it was in contract within a few weeks after listing, but my buyer had a house to sell, so we were patient and waited, and his house didn't sell that fast. And you look at the market now and go, this is insane that you put something on the market and it's selling, even the multi-million-dollar homes, for instance, on the Chain of Lake in Pinckney, that my head is spinning when you look at what has gone on the market and to see something over $1 million selling days.
And they're going to keep going.
Yeah.
They're going to keep going.
Yeah, it is.
The chain has always been a different market, hasn't it? Even through the housing crisis, it held tough. I mean, it went down, but I was just blown away out of the whole county. It seemed like that chain was just really held together better than at most places.
Well, we have a cottage on the Chain, and the thing that I've noticed since being, a homeowner on the Chain is the amount of people that have been on that chain for decades and lifetimes. Like we had one neighbor next door. He was third generation original family. His grandparents built the cottage. His parents then had it. Him and his brother had it. And then he finally sold it because nobody in the family, the family was getting smaller. There was nobody to use it. He sold it for top dollar. I wish I would have bought that lot. And then somebody tore it down and Bigfooted the house. And, we're one of the last original cottages on the Chain. I have I should send you a picture of my cottage. I have a picture with the Model T in the yard from the 1920s, late 1920s.
Isn't that awesome?
It is awesome. Like I go back and forth between, do I tear it down and rebuild like everybody else? And we're like, oh no, this is just too cool. We're hanging on to that.
It is a little cool cottage.
Yeah. Like, I'm not going to live there. So Jim won't live there. So it'll stay as a cottage. But yeah, it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
I have a great love for older architecture like that and stuff. So I know what you mean. And it does change, but there's nothing better than getting some of these older original houses, whether 1880s or the early 1900s on the chain or whatever. It's wonderful to see them if they, have been well maintained.
Oh yeah. Well, downtown Howell's been an interesting renaissance.
Yes.
And because that has obviously an older housing stock, but to see where that was even 5 years ago and the demand, buyers want to be downtown Howell and they're willing to pay obviously for a renovated home. Especially when some of those homes are 100 years old.
And it's getting pretty nice down there. You see some of these older homes getting
they're
very
beautiful.
nice. I go, man, I'm thinking I'd like to have my kid be near me, and I'd love to buy him but a starter home in downtown Hall is what, $250? You won't even find nothing, But,
not moving ready.
But hey, we got to wrap up the show here. But Mike and Karen, any final words to our consumers or real estate agents out there of what to look for the next year and what's the best way to prepare a house?
Without hesitation, to me, particularly in our community, stay with the local realtor, stay with the local lender that knows there, that's plugged into our community, that you're going to see, at the restaurant, church, what have you. But that's the fabric of our community. And I think if you stay with those people, you'll always be just fine.
And how would one get a hold of you, Mike? Could you just give us your phone number or your website?
Sure. Let me pre-qualify. I do not have a website deliberately.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate.
need
It's
one.
100% referral. Yeah. And
You're hard to get.
and but I'm blessed, really am. And it's just, the community's been great to me. And I like just staying here. With my friends. So, but my phone number is 810-220-1814. And we have an office downtown Brighton above Lynn's Cafe and then at the Grand River office in the RE/MAX building.
Well, that's wonderful. Danielle, any closing words here?
Thank you so much, Mike and
Thanks for
Karen, for
having us.
joining us today. We
Well,
really appreciate it.
We want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas. Have a happy holiday. That's Danielle Boote, and I'm Victor Bals for A Smarter Way Home. And just remember, we all got to try to get along. We'll see you next time on A Smarter Way Home.